The central hypothesis, developed by Graham Hancock over his series of books, starting with Fingerprints of the Gods, culminating in his most recent work, America Before, is that during the last ice age, so before 13,800 years ago, there was some advanced human group that understood astronomy, geometry, agriculture, and maybe some other sciences we don't fully comprehend today, that had a global reach, that was able to map the world accurately, and which laid down seeds culturally, technologically, and mythologically in a way which has influenced the development of world cultures throughout our ancient past. The raison d'etre for this hypothesis is to account for the growing list of anomalies in the archaeological record, which are very difficult to account for using more conventional theories. So the appearance of Göbekli Tepe, 9,500 years ago in eastern Anatolia, which is the largest megalithic structure for thousands of years after it was constructed. The conventional theory will say that hunter-gatherers built this thing, but the earliest layer of Göbekli Tepe is the largest and the most sophisticated artistically. So if hunter-gatherers were just learning how to do this, why were they the best at it right when they started? Surely that's counterintuitive. There are other megaliths like the Baalbek megalith in Lebanon, like some of the purportedly Incan massive stone walls using 10, 20, 50-ton stone blocks shaped like jigsaw puzzles, fitting together without any mortar, without any gaps, often on sheer rock precipices that we don't know how they got them to their current location, the stones, and other mysteries that Graham goes into over his series of books. There's also ancient maps which accurately depict the coastlines of North and South America, even Antarctica, as they would have been during the last ice age. These maps are handed down to Renaissance cartographers from the Byzantine library, and the documents there, the maps from Byzantium, are from yet older sources, from antiquity. And even during antiquity, we have evidence or records of cartographers saying they got this from X ancient source. So those are some of the data points, and there's also mythological similarities that are difficult to account for unless you accept some kind of ancient source. In his most recent book, America Before, he goes into the mound builder culture and some of the astronomical alignments of these massive earthwork sites. There are also geometrical affinities between distant mound builder sites, which shows evidence of some kind of higher culture or technology than we suppose the hunter-gatherers of that Paleo-Indian period, starting like 4000 BC or 6000 BC, to have possessed. So he also goes into the Amazonian civilization, which most people are not even aware there was a civilization in the Amazon. There's a growing body of evidence supporting that claim now, and so if you want to go into some of that, I would recommend getting the new book. Just for the sake of the data contained in this thing, I would say go ahead and buy it. I definitely recommend it. Although I do disagree with the central claim of this book in particular. I like his overall hypothesis, which is really just a continuation of the genre of literature initiated by Ignatius Donnelly, the Atlantis literature. So I like that hypothesis, but what Graham says in this book is that the location, the likely location of this ancient advanced group was North America. And the reason he gives for this is, in my mind, just a little facile, because the Younger Dryas comet, which caused the Younger Dryas from 13,800 years ago to, let me do this right, 11,500 years ago, the comet particularly devastated North America and the North Atlantic. And so if the comet hit basically over Canada, it would hit the ice sheets and it wouldn't leave a big impact crater, and it would instantly melt massive amounts of water, which would pour over the northern U.S. And Randall Carlson, who's appeared with Graham a number of times, even on Joe Rogan's podcast. If you haven't seen those episodes, I would definitely recommend it. There's a lot of good information there. Also, watch Randall's presentations on this topic that he gives by himself. But Randall goes over evidence geologically of just such a great flood, this kind of catastrophist explanation for a number of geological features stretching from Washington on the west coast to New York on the east coast. So because there was this ancient cataclysm, Graham basically says that any advanced civilization that existed there would be now undetectable. Well, okay, I mean, true, but there's not a single piece of evidence that Graham points to which would suggest that North America at any point in history was ever more advanced than the rest of the world. I'm not aware of any such evidence, and Graham puts forward absolutely none. So that's why I say it's a little facile to just say this region of the world was hit particularly hard, therefore this is probably where the advanced group was. It's finding a lacuna in the archaeological record and then fitting in your pet theory there. So that's pretty weak. He also suggests, I think ridiculously, that the Australo-Melanesian genetic component present in remote Amazonian tribes is accountable for, by way of an interventionist resettlement of peoples on the part of this ancient civilization. So he says that likely the ancient civilization, because they knew astronomy and they observed the patterns of the heavens, understood that this comet impact was going to come. And so they prepared the way by setting up bastions for themselves around the world. And one of the ways they did this was to relocate people from Australia and Melanesia into the Amazon. Surely there were easier ways of getting this job done, especially since the whole crux of his argument in this book is that North and South America have been inhabited much longer than we are comfortable thinking about. So until recently, there was the Clovis First dogma, which said that prior to 13,000, 14,000 BC, nobody was in North America or South America. Now evidence is starting to come out questioning this, and he puts forward, Graham does, some stuff from California that shows evidence of possible early hominid activity. We don't know if it was Homo sapiens or not. Based on some mammoth remains, which dates to 130,000 years ago. And so he reasons, Graham does, that if there were humans here 130,000 years ago, that's plenty of time for them to have developed into an advanced civilization by 13,800 years ago. Well, if there were people there, why did they have to migrate people from Australia and Melanesia into the Amazon? There's no explanation given for this. A much simpler explanation is to say that there wasn't just the Beringian migration, there was also a South Pacific migration route. Famously, Thor Heyerdahl thought that this was a migration route, although in the opposite direction in ancient times, and he proved that this kind of voyage was possible with Kon-Tiki, the raft that he made imitating Stone Age rafts that people did have in Polynesia. So if there was a South Pacific migration route during the Upper Paleolithic, that would bring this Australo-Melanesian genetic signature into the Amazon. And then later Beringian migrations could have basically suppressed or replaced this signature in North American and most South American populations. The Amazonians, being isolated, would have been immune from this to some extent. And there's actually reason to support such an Upper Paleolithic migration because the Upper Paleolithic peoples of Southeast Asia did actually practice deep sea fishing. We have evidence of this. So they were navigating open waters. Yeah, I think that there's probably been multiple migrations into North and South America from the South Pacific, from Beringia, and, you know, as evinced by recent history, from Europe as well. In 1492 with Columbus, in the 12th century with Leif Erikson, and probably before that, maybe the Phoenicians. There's some interesting evidence on that front. The Phoenicians are actually a big question on a number of issues. And maybe in a more ancient way than that, no, sure, the Phoenicians aren't exactly European, but they probably would have been coming from that Mediterranean region. Maybe before that, though, with the Solutrean culture of Western Europe during the Upper Paleolithic, roughly around 17,000 BC or so. So in that right time frame, from like the end of the last ice age, starting around 20,000 years ago, and then continuing through until the Younger Dryas. So there was like this warming trend, kind of an interglacial period. So the Solutrean thrived during that period. They could have hopped along the ice sheet of the North Atlantic like the Inuit have in recent times and made it to North America, and that would explain the Clovis culture, which otherwise we have no archaeological parallel for in Siberia. There's no way of accounting for that industry, and the earliest Clovis sites are on the East Coast, not the West Coast. The majority of the sites are from the East Coast. The population center is in the East, not the West. So Dennis Stanford, or the late Dennis Stanford, he actually very recently passed, has a number of excellent presentations on this topic. And I think it's a discredit to Graham's new book that he's talking about ancient settlement of North and South America. He doesn't even once mention the Solutrean hypothesis. That's a shame. And it's hypocritical since Graham spends ample time castigating mainstream academia for not entertaining fringe theories. Well, here's the Solutrean hypothesis, which kind of raises some questions against your narrative, Graham, and you're not even giving it a single line on the page, not even to dismiss it. So if you read the Wikipedia article for this, it's going to be very biased, but if you look into the evidence for yourself, a lot of the reasons that the Wikipedia page gives for dismissing it, I think are bogus. So anyway, look into it for yourself, but that's one explanation for the Clovis culture, and that segues into what I think is a more parsimonious explanation for this, the location of this ancient civilization, which again, I agree with Graham, such a thing likely did exist during the Ice Age. I say it was probably the Azores Islands. If this Solutrean migration was happening, then they may have been stranded on the Azores, or, you know, traveled there and traveled back, or just, yeah, been stranded there and evolved separately. Could have been the Solutrean culture, it could have been the Ibero-Maurutian culture from North Africa, could have been some Levantine culture that was migrating around the Mediterranean. Could have been a combination of peoples from the Mediterranean region. But the point is that it wasn't North America that was the most advanced place on Earth, according to the evidence that we actually have during the late Upper Paleolithic. It was the Mediterranean region. That's just the fact of the matter. If you look at the Upper Paleolithic record, the most advanced places on Earth that during that time are Western Europe, the Levant, North Africa, and arguably Japan as well. Although I don't think there's any reason to suppose that Japan reached the east coast of North America to start the Clovis. But yeah, so since the most advanced stuff was there, if the Solutrean hypothesis is true, they were migrating across the North Atlantic, they could have been stranded on the Azores Islands, developed in parallel, and the Solutreans in particular had a tradition of large stone sculptures. And so if we're looking for someone to account for massive stoneworks, megalithic constructions, look to the Solutreans. Look at some of the rock art of the Solutreans and the later Magdalenians. The bison reliefs, the horse reliefs, these things are three-dimensional and very sophisticated. They didn't just do the walls like Lascaux that we know about. The Solutreans were an advanced culture. So if they made it to the Azores, they could have developed in parallel. An island habitat could have caused different sorts of social pressures, maybe a stronger inclination towards hierarchy. The megalithic age during the late Neolithic, early Bronze Age restarted in the Mediterranean in island contexts with like Malta and stuff like that. So maybe an island led to this kind of hierarchical structure. And also Randall Carlson points out that during the last ice age, the heavy ice sheets on Greenland may have depressed the continental plate there, causing the mid-Atlantic ridge, which is this flex point, to raise up. And if that was the case, then not only would the lower sea levels have increased the amount of land present on the Azores, but this raising of the continental plate itself would have made a very large landmass, perhaps a continent-sized landmass, that we would have no evidence of today. So Graham picks North America, I think, because it fits with the sacral victimology of contemporary socio-political discourse, saying that like ancient Native Americans were the advanced people is not going to like offend anybody. If you said it was ancient Europeans, that would definitely be contentious. But the ancient population of Western Europe was not modern-day Europeans anyway. Although roughly a third of our ancestry derives from that population, but that's kind of not relevant. So yeah, that's what I think. But he says that this gap in the record exists, and advanced civilization could have existed there. Why not the Azores Islands then? Maybe consider that. I think it's more parsimonious. It's closer to the center of actual known technological development, and it fits with Plato's narrative just a bit better, doesn't it? But anyway, that's what I have to say. Think about it. Look into the Solutrean hypothesis. Thank you for listening.